My name is Charles Grobe. I'm a professor of psychiatry and pediatrics at the UCLA School of Medicine, and I'm the director of the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at Harbor UCLA Medical Center. And on the side, I do some research. Now, the most recent study I've done was from about 2004 to 2008. We had permission from FDA to conduct a study using psilocybin, which is the active alkaloid in hallucinogenic mushrooms. The subjects were individuals diagnosed with advanced cancer who had overwhelming anxiety. One woman, we played the Tibetan Gyoto monks, and she felt she was being suspended off her bed, held in a web of hands by the Buddhist monks, and they were chanting healing songs. And she found it a very, very powerful experience. In conducting these sessions, music is integral. If you match the right subject with the right music at the right time in the session, it can really fuel that experience, can really kind of help that individual take their experience up to the next level.
We definitely do a history of popular music through drugs. And I've actually done this in teaching. A lot of the stuff that gets played at the symphony, some very famous pieces by 19th century composers, were either about drugs, or the composers were themselves also experimenting with various types of narcotics and things like that. So that's a historical fact. The composer Hector Berlioz, 19th century French composer, one of his most famous pieces is called the Symphonie Fantastique, the Fantastic Symphony. There's all kinds of, sort of heavy metal type imagery of witches' Sabbath, the devil shows up. And the program of the symphony, it's actually a sort of narrative symphony, tells people that it is the result of an opium dream. So basically, Berlioz more or less claimed that the inspiration for the symphony, and actually what the symphony is about, partially has to do with taking opium.
The marriage between drugs and music, it started with the blues guys, drinking and writing songs, lyrics about, and doing heroin, maybe even early jazz. I think that was the real marriage. And then the 60s was the child of that.
At one point in the 50s into the early 60s, psychedelics were considered the cutting edge of psychiatric and neuroscience research. And in fact, many of the great discoveries in neuroscience originally came from laboratory studies using LSD as a probe. Suddenly, with Tim Leary's involvement and some others, suddenly the secret was out of the laboratory and into the mainstream culture.
The counterculture in the 60s was not just a drug and music movement, it was a political movement, it was a social movement where the music and the drugs fueled people into really standing up for themselves and standing against these powers that were really suppressing them.
One of the things that happened in the 1960s is, under the influence of these psychedelics and this sort of countercultural explosion, there was, for a while, a kind of dissolving of the racially marked boundaries of musical style.
It was a time of very rapid change, and these are catalysts of change. And I think given the uncontrolled nature with which they were often used, it caused a great deal of alarm.
Under the influence of psychedelics, popular musicians, the Beatles would be the classic example, they weren't the only ones, were so omnivorous in terms of the sounds they wanted to grab. That one of the things that LSD does is it, in the famous phrase, opens the doors of perception, right? And it sort of takes the filters down. And so suddenly any kind of sound became interesting. And the big consequence of this, I think, was that in the culture at large, people began to realize that this sort of pop music, this kiddie music, could actually be art.
Psychedelics certainly facilitate individuals being able to look at music from very different perspectives, with, let's say, far greater sensitivity and receptivity to some of the themes emerging.
I didn't really start appreciating music fully, before I started smoking pot.
You end up hearing more complex rhythms, you end up hearing more complex harmonies, and these are the types of things that you hear while you're on LSD. You're not just hearing the music, you're hearing the music in combination with all of the other sounds of your experience.
I am constantly participating in a music culture that is about wonder and experience, and I see it happening in these kids' faces. I see them in front of these loud sound systems, throngs of ecstasy, and not just the kind that you take, but this actual ecstatic state coming down and then losing oneself and just dancing as if there's no tomorrow, or the reckless abandon.
I've definitely been to shows where it's like I've gone places and I haven't taken a sip of anything, there's just nothing in my system and I've gone from Earth to another place.
Most artists that I know don't take drugs to make their art.
You don't need drugs to be happy, and the music makes people happy. So.
There's nothing in the world ever that could make more people happy than music. Not religion, nothing. Like a song can make anybody happy.
I actually haven't tried to make music while tripping on something. I don't function well enough to probably try to actually accomplish a song, but lots of ideas come out of that, and a lot of, inspiration comes out of these experiences that you have while you're tripping on something. These hours that you should be sleeping, where you should be dreaming, you're awake and you're working on music. It's my form of, tripping while actually making music.
My friend Jack Adams, who plays in White Fence, he considers sleep deprivation like free drugs. He's right. For a moment there, there's like a good window of delirium.
Psychedelic music was clearly linked with LSD and mushrooms, and it's like those two, like the effects of those drugs inform the type of music that people were making, and then people were making this music that's like recreating sort of the experience of the drugs. And I don't know which one comes first, do people start taking these drugs and then making, like slowing down all their fucking hip hop, or like did they start slowing it down and they're like, we need to come up with some kind of cough syrup drink that goes along with this shit? Like, this is too good.
People are aware of what you might call almost an evolution of drug cultures. You can tell from the late 1960s and early 70s, Lester Bangs wrote a great piece about this, that people stopped taking LSD and began to take downers, quaaludes, and that's how you get the Stooges, and certainly sort of sludgy heavy metal rock, is that people are actually taking barbiturates, and the music starts to get much heavier. And so there seems to be a kind of almost triangular relationship between a kind of musical scene, a drug, and then a crackdown on that drug. The sound of music does shift.
I think like if there was a new drug, there would be a new type of music or sound.
It wouldn't just be a form of music, it would be a culture that would grow up around it. Just like skateboarding, you've associated with something that's far deeper. And so I think you give the rise to whole movements, basically.
Isn't there something called like chill wave? I feel like that could be like a Xanax thing.
What kind of sound does like ayahuasca make? I had some pretty dirty burner music right there.
I've always loved the word psychedelic, but I realized at a certain point that it had certain connotations. I like to remind people of its actual meaning, which is mind manifesting.
When I think of psychedelic, I think of sort of a loosening of the rules. It's sort of like an expansion of the consciousness. You don't necessarily have to worry about what's supposed to be. It's more about what you feel in the moment.
I know a psychedelic has a weird ring to it now. People are like, oh god, fucking, I think my psychedelic is rooted in reality. Like singing about a transvestite is more psychedelic to me than reading lyrics about like a strawberry that ate a cat.
Music, it's weird. I mean, it's hard to label things psychedelic anymore. It's all pretty much trippy. You know, from a Britney Spears song to a techno song to somebody that uses too much reverb or shitty recording techniques. So
I was in my room and I heard a baby crying, and I thought, oh, it's like 3 a.m. Like it's kind of late. And then I forgot about it, and then it started crying again, and then I heard a gunshot, and then the baby stopped crying. Obviously unrelated, but it just was a very funny thing. Baby crying, gunshot, no more baby. Psychedelic. It's horrible, man. I'm sorry.
Terence McKenna actually once said that the psychedelic experience, fundamentally, if you break down all these sort of differences and find just the similarities, that it's about boundary dissolution. And I think sex, drugs, and music really, beyond just rock and roll, all have this aspect of boundary dissolution.
In today's world, yeah, it's more like sex, drugs, and dubstep, you know. The rock and rollers are probably trying to clean up just to be counter to that, I'd think.
The odd term out there is drugs. I mean, because I think you can argue rock and roll is just another word for sex. It's the third one of that trinity, which is arguably the sort of revolutionary one. You know, because you move from sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which is kind of fun, to like the MC5, which is rock and roll, dope, and fucking in the streets. You know, so it's like, okay, we had the rock and roll, then you add the dope, and then it's in the streets, and civilization breaks down.
I think there's a lot of up-and-coming like DJs or producers or kind of forward-minded thinkers that I know for a fact they must use at least a few psychedelics or had a heavy psychedelic trip, because some of the intricate patterns and the way they stage the lights and everything, you know that like they're kind of getting into a place where you can kind of only relate to if you've had that experience.
People, when they're making this music, are drawing on previous drug experiences when they themselves are either in the audience and they're either trying to make music that harmonizes with those experiences because they know what they are, or they're trying to represent them, you know, both the good and the bad. So you'll have light and dark tracks, which are about various aspects of the drug experience.
It's a mutually beneficial relationship. You have being on the substance makes the music sound better. Listening to the music makes the trip feel amazing, you know. I don't think I'd even be making music because I wouldn't be open-minded enough to do so if I hadn't had these experiences, you know, with certain substances.
We're getting to know more and more about how it has a physical effect on the body, right? So repetitive beats, loud sounds create a visceral physical response. There's an interaction between the kind of physical effects that music has on people and the change in your sensory apparatus when you take certain kind of chemicals. So there's a positive feedback there.
You go to a festival and at nighttime all of a sudden the techno turns on and everyone starts taking Molly and ecstasy and the place gets fucking creepy and lame.
You know, the music often played at a rave has a very, intense, rapid beat. Very often the music is at 120 beats per minute, which is the same rate of the fetal heart in utero. So all individuals while in utero, you know, just floating, you know, hearing their own heartbeat going at 120 per minute, and here you have the rave phenomena with music replicating that beat.
The music can be your substance. The music can be your serotonin injection. It can be your adrenaline, if you choose it to be.
The pure state you can enter is the egoless state. Okay, so the psychedelic state is an ecstatic one. It is a synesthetic loss. By the lack of ego, you discover sound and taste and sight that is impressed and becomes you. You become these strange other sympathetic strings. You are the banana on the floor. You are the night sky. You are these things, and it as much as a silly, messed up statement as that is, it is absolutely fundamentally true that you are gone. That's the psychedelic state.
That's the best part about it. Is the ego loss. Yeah, that's actually you're like a baby man or woman.
But you can also get there through meditation. This has been proven. You can also get there through exercise, probably, and eating a healthy diet. But for God's sakes, you can get there a lot faster through dropping a bunch of acid.
One of our subjects in the cancer study was a woman who had no experiences with psychedelics. She was entirely naive. So at the end of the first hour, I asked how she was doing. She said nothing was happening. After the second hour, nothing was happening. Okay, put the eye shades back on. Something will happen. After the third hour, nothing was happening. Then I started to get concerned. At that point, I turned to one of my co-investigators and I said, Preet, I think the music you're playing is just a little too mellow. I think we need something with a little more oomph to it. So he said, well, down in my car I have Dead Can Dance. I said, oh, that's perfect. It has a lot of dissonance to it. I felt this lady needed to be challenged a little bit more. We pop it in the CD player, and within a couple of minutes, the floodgates had opened and the tears started to stream down her face. And she was crying because during her father's lifetime, she had never been able to tell him she loved him, even though she deeply loved him, but they were not a expressive family. So she was crying for the lost opportunity. That powerful experience, and I think that cathexis with her departed father within her visionary state really helped her to maintain far more stable mood regulation and better morale and less anxiety.
There's a concept that sociologists use, and it's also relevant to popular music studies, which is called internal tourism. For large sections of the working class in an industrialized society, it's not really possible to go to the Cayman Islands or take a trip to Hawaii. There is a sort of social rhythm of working hard 5 or even 6 days and then having a blowout on those days of rest. So the classic example of this is the mod subculture of the 1960s. On the weekends, you'd start on Friday and you'd start popping amphetamine pills because you wanted to party non-stop for the whole weekend because that was your vacation. So there's a strong desire during these internal tourism outbreaks to free the body.
I mean, I remember the day that my G.I. Joe stopped talking. It's a sad day. And I seriously think you try to get that back in whatever you do moving forward from there. That imagination is like free entertainment, How bad do you want that back? I'd rather have that than any fucking movie in the world.
Really, that's what we're all looking for when we sort of, delve into any of these things. It's we're looking for this sort of ecstasy of dissolution.
It's reality TV. It's affirming that like your existence is the show that you get to watch all the time. You get to live, and you can be outside of it and see yourself in an infinite perspective as this tiny thing. Almost remove yourself from your own perspective, take yourself away, and see where you stand on this giant plateau of the universe, just rolling around. You're just this one tiny little pinpoint, and then you can flip that around and go the other direction and travel into like the world where everything is just you, and you're just this being that's like your entire essence is going to be everything you've ever experienced. You know where you are, you know where you stand in relation to things, and it's like very confusing, and usually there is no right answer as to like which of these perspectives is right. But that's comforting in itself, that there's never going to be a right answer. But there is going to be like a tangible real world out there for you. And that's always comforting, lie back on it.
drugs.
Right.